The alarm was already screaming when I reached the bridge. Not a drill. The Vorkai swarm fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel 20 minutes ahead of schedule, and every sensor on the frigate Unrelenting was lighting up like a city at night. I pulled myself into the command chair and looked at the tactical display in front of me. The screen was covered in red. Hundreds of contacts, then thousands, then more. A cloud of living warships pouring into our sector like a tide that had no intention of stopping. My name is Maravas. I am the captain of the Unrelenting, a single human frigate carrying 312 crew members, assigned to the defense perimeter above Harkon's Ridge, a colony world at the edge of explored space, home to 70,000 people who had come here to farm frozen soil and build something small and quiet and their own. None of them had asked for a war. None of them knew how close it was. My first officer, Lieutenant Owen Carver, was already at his station when I sat down. He was a calm man. He had a narrow face and careful eyes, and he never said anything louder than he needed to. When the alarm had gone off that morning, he had simply walked to his post, pulled up the incoming data, and said nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know about how bad it was. How many? I asked. Confirmed contacts now passing 400,000, he said. Projection puts the full fleet at somewhere between 900,000 and 1.2 million individual units. Troop transports, hive carriers, surface assault pods, all of them aimed at us. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Million soldiers, maybe more. Against one frigate, one asteroid belt, and 70,000 civilians below us who did not even know what a Vorkai looked like. Open a channel to the hive ship, I said. Carver looked at me. You want to talk to them? I want them to think we're talking, I said. Open the channel. The Vorkai High General was called Oryx Thal. I had read every file we had on him before this assignment. He was the architect of the Dominion's 41st conquest, a species called the Pelari, who had surrendered within 6 hours of first contact. He was patient, methodical, and he had never lost a campaign. He was also, according to every intelligence report I had read, deeply contemptuous of any species that chose to fight instead of yield. He saw resistance as a form of ignorance. In his worldview, the mathematics of numbers always settled the argument. An argument was simply what uninformed creatures did before they understood the mathematics. His face, if you could call it that, filled my screen a few seconds after Carver opened the channel. He was enormous, even on the display. 3 meters of armored insectoid biology, compound eyes the color of copper, and a voice that came through the translator like gravel being dragged across stone. Captain Voss, he said. I had expected your surrender by now. General Oryxthal, I said. I thought we might speak before things became complicated. There is nothing complicated about this, he said. I have 1 million soldiers. Your colony world holds 70,000 souls. The arithmetic is simple. I leaned back in my chair. Behind me, I could feel Owen's attention like a hand on my shoulder. Around the bridge, every crew member had gone very still. They were listening. They were afraid. They deserved the truth, and what I was about to say was not entirely a bluff. But it was not entirely confidence either. It was something in between, which is the only place where captains live. Good, I said. I have 1 million targets. I closed the channel. For 3 seconds, the bridge was completely silent. Then Specialist Helen Burke, who operated our communications array and was 24 years old and had never been in a combat engagement before this morning, let out a breath that sounded like a quiet laugh and then immediately covered her mouth with her hand. Owen turned from his station. Captain, I know, I said. We have 1 ship. I know that too. They have 1 million. Owen, I looked at him. I know what they have. Bring up the asteroid belt mapping. I want the full gravitational corridor data on screen. And get me Petty Officer Kale. Owen held my gaze for 1 more second. Then he turned back to his station and started working. I had not been bluffing about the targets. I had been bluffing about the confidence. The truth was simpler and more human than confidence. 47 hours earlier, before the Vorkai fleet had even been confirmed on long-range sensors, I had sent a signal into deep space. 7 words, no reply expected. A contingency plan I had started building 6 months ago, when intelligence had first suggested the Dominion's attention was turning toward our outer colonies. The Vorkai did not understand contingency planning. Their hive mind structure was optimized for execution. They would commit fully to a single strategy and execute it with terrifying precision. They did not waste resources on scenarios that might not happen. In their culture, preparing for unlikely outcomes was considered a form of failure, a sign of insufficient certainty in one's primary plan. I had spent the last 6 months preparing for 17 different outcomes. Most of them had never happened, but one had, and that was enough. Petty Officer Leon Kale appeared on the bridge exactly 4 minutes after I called for him. He was my weapons and drone specialist, a stocky, quiet man from the northern coast of England who had a gift for spatial mathematics that I had never encountered in anyone else. He could look at a gravitational field map and see attack geometries the way other people saw pirs in clouds. Effortlessly, naturally, as though the numbers arranged themselves for him. "Captain," he said, pulling up the asteroid belt data on his station. "Talk to me about the choke point," I said. He pulled up the model immediately, fingers moving across the display. "The Vorkai fleet dropped in here," he said, pointing to a sector just outside the outer asteroid ring. "Their formation pattern is standard first swarm doctrine, wide front, mass coverage, designed to overwhelm surface defenses by sheer volume of landing units. But their doctrine also requires them to compress the formation to navigate any significant gravitational obstacle. The outer belt is a significant gravitational obstacle, so they have to funnel through one of 3 corridors," Kale said. "And based on their approach vector and their fleet formation, they cannot use the southern or the northern passage without breaking their front, which their doctrine does not permit during an active approach. They will use the central corridor. They will be compressed, Captain. 1,000,000 ships trying to pass through a gap 80,000 kilometers wide. How long does the transit take at their current approach speed? Approximately 4 hours. The lead elements will be through in 90 minutes. The rear elements won't clear the belt for another 6 hours after that." I looked at the map. 1,000,000 soldiers, strung out through a corridor 80,000 kilometers wide, and stretched across 6 hours of transit time. Not a wave, a river, and rivers had banks. "How many drones do we have in the cargo holds?" I asked. 94,000, Captain. The batch we picked up from Relay Station 9 last month. "How many can you prep for autonomous kinetic deployment in 30 hours? Kale looked at the number for a moment. "All of them," he said. "If I pull half the engineering team." "Pull them," I said. "I want every drone seeded through the asteroid belt before the Vorkai reach transit range. Not targeting the fleet. Targeting the belt itself. Specific rocks, specific trajectory, specific timing. I want the corridor to become a corridor that closes." Kale looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the map. Then he looked back at me, and something happened in his expression that was not quite a smile but was close to one. Expression of someone who has just seen a mathematics problem resolve cleanly. "Yes, Captain," he said. Carver waited until Kale had left the bridge before he spoke. "You're going to collapse the corridor on them while they're in transit," he said quietly. "Not collapse it," I said, "redirect it. A controlled kinetic cascade through the asteroid field. Enough mass in motion to turn the transit corridor into something they cannot navigate at formation speed. They'll have to slow down. They'll have to break formation. And a Vorkai swarm in broken formation is a very different thing from a Vorkai swarm in full doctrine. It's still 1,000,000 ships, Mara." I had known Owen Carver for 11 years. He called me by my first name when he was worried, which was how I knew this was serious. I appreciated it. A captain who surrounds herself only with people who agree with her is not a captain. She is a disaster waiting for a date. "I know," I said. "That's Senate signal 47 hours ago." He paused. "What signal?" "Direct anvil," I said. 3 cruisers. They've been running dark behind the colony's moon for the last 3 days. No emissions, no transponders, no radar signature. The Vorkai's long-range sensors swept this system twice yesterday. They found nothing but a moon and an asteroid belt and 1 small frigate. The bridge was very quiet again. But this time the silence felt different. It felt like the moment before something enormous shifts. "You planned this before they even confirmed the attack," Owen said. "I planned for the possibility," I said. "There is a difference. I also planned for 11 other possibilities that didn't happen. I'm glad this was the one that did, because this is the only one that uses the drone batch." Owen looked at the tactical display for a long time. The red cloud of Vorkai contacts moved slowly across the screen, enormous and patient and absolutely certain it had already won. "They think they're coming to collect a surrender," he said. "Yes," I said. "They think the arithmetic is simple." I stood up from my chair and walked to the observation window at the front of the bridge. Below us, through the darkness, Harkon's Ridge was a gray-white crescent, half in shadow. Somewhere down there, people were waking up to an ordinary morning. Children were eating breakfast. Farmers were checking weather reports. Someone was probably complaining about the cold, which on Harkon's Ridge was a perfectly reasonable thing to complain about. They did not know. I was glad they did not know. My job was to make sure the morning stayed ordinary for as long as possible, and then, quietly, to make sure there was a morning after this one. "Get some sleep if you can," I told Owen. "Both of us in 4-hour rotations. We have 47 hours. And then, he asked. I turned back from the window. And then we find out if 1,000,000 targets is enough. I went to my quarters for exactly 3 hours and 40 minutes. I did not sleep for most of it. I lay on my bunk in the dark and ran numbers in my head, corridors, timing, drone trajectories, the weight of 70,000 lives pressing down on the ceiling above me like a physical thing. But I was not afraid of the million ships. I had been afraid once, early in my career, of large numbers. I had learned over time that large numbers are only as powerful as the geometry that carries them. A flood is unstoppable on a flat plain. In a canyon, it becomes something you can direct. My job was to find the canyon. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, 94,000 drones were being loaded and armed and programmed by a man who saw mathematics the way other people heard music. Somewhere behind the moon, 3 cruisers were running silent in the dark. Somewhere out in the deep, 1,000,000 soldiers were coming for 70,000 people who had done nothing to deserve it. I stared at the ceiling. The arithmetic, I thought, is never as simple as you think. The drones took 29 hours and 40 minutes to deploy. Leon Kale stood at his station for almost the entire duration, sleeping twice in a chair for no more than 40 minutes at a stretch, eating a meal replacement bar at his console at the 14-hour mark when one of the younger engineers brought him one without being asked. He thanked her, Specialist Dara Finch, 26, from Leeds, and kept working. I watched him from across the bridge and thought, not for the first time, that the people who decided wars were rarely the ones who understood them, and the ones who understood them were almost always standing at a station like that one, somewhere in the middle of a ship, doing quiet and precise work while someone with more rank worried at a window. The Vorkai fleet had slowed its approach after my channel cut. Oryxthal had not hailed again for 18 hours, which told me something useful. He was not panicking, he was analyzing. He had sent scouts, small fast craft, to run the perimeter of the asteroid belt, probably checking for hidden fleet elements. The scouts had found nothing because the 3 cruisers behind the moon were running cold and dark, and the drone swarm had been seeded carefully, unit by unit, each one tucked against a rock or drifting slow enough to read as debris on passive scan. The Vorkai were very good at detecting active power signatures. They were less good at detecting things that were already doing what rocks normally do, which is nothing. At the 22-hour mark, Oryxthal hailed again. I answered on the bridge with Owen and Kale both present, because I wanted them to hear it and because I had no patience for pretending this was a private matter. Captain Voss, Oryxthal said, you have not surrendered. I have not, I agreed. My fleet is ahead of schedule, he said. The translated voice was smooth now, almost pleasant. It had the quality of a man who has decided to be generous before he has to be harsh. You have 31 hours. I am informing you of this as a courtesy. Thank you, General, I said. There was a pause. The compound eyes on the screen shifted. In Vorkai body language, which I had studied extensively from the files, that movement indicated something close to curiosity, or perhaps uncertainty, the 2 responses in their species that looked the most similar. You are not afraid, he said. I am, I said honestly. But that is not the same as being unprepared. Another pause. You have 1 ship, Captain. I have what I need. I closed the channel again. Owen exhaled slowly. You keep doing that. Keeps him thinking, I said. Every hour he spends analyzing my comm is an hour my drones spend learning his approach vector. I sat back down and pulled up the tactical display. The Vorkai fleet was compressing now, exactly as Kale had predicted, as it began to orient toward the central transit corridor through the belt. The 1,000 ships at the leading edge were already tightening their formation. From above, on the tactical map, the effect was striking. 1,000,000 individual points of red light slowly gathering themselves into a column, the way a river narrows before it reaches a canyon. They're committing to the central corridor, Kale said quietly, not looking up from his station. How confident are you? I asked. 93%, he said. The southern passage would require a 17-degree formation shift. Northern passage would cost them 6 hours of approach time. Their doctrine does not allow either deviation during an active conquest approach. They will come straight through. And the drones? Sequenced and ready, he said. 94,216 units. Primary targets are the 9 anchor asteroids in the central corridor. When they go, the secondary cascade will follow. The corridor will not collapse, it will redirect. Vectors shift 32 degrees over a 4-hour window. The transit becomes impossible at formation speed. They'll slow down, Owen said. They'll have to stop, Kale corrected gently, to reorganize, possibly for several hours. And that's when the cruisers come around the moon, Owen said, working it through aloud. That's when the cruisers come around the moon, I confirmed. Owen looked at the display. 3 cruisers and 1 frigate against 1,000,000 ships. Against 1,000,000 ships that are stopped in a debris corridor in broken formation, I said. There is a difference. He nodded slowly. The history books, he said. Excuse me? You used to talk about it at the academy, Owen said. History books Cannae, Midway, Thermopylae. You wrote a whole paper about it in second year. I smiled just slightly. You read that paper? Everyone read that paper, he said. You argued that every major human underdog victory in recorded history followed a single pattern. The smaller force did not try to match the larger force. It changed the geometry of the engagement until the larger force's size became a liability, rather than an advantage. Numbers are only power, I said. When the numbers can reach you, he was quiet for a moment. Then Mara, the cruisers. Who's commanding them? Captain Ruth Darby is commanding the Resolute, I said. Captain Ed Fenn has the Galloway. Captain Nina Osi has the Ardent. They've been sitting dark behind that moon for 3 days. 4 days by now, I said. They went silent before the Vorkai scouts arrived, and they haven't broken radio silence at all. Not once, I said. Ruth Darby could sit in total silence for a month if the mission required it. Ed Fenn is the same. I served with both of them. Nina Ose, I know by reputation. She completed a 14-day dark-running patrol near the Vorkai border 2 years ago without a single detectable emission. Not one. Owen looked at me. And they know the plan? They know Directive Anvil, I said. They know the timing windows. They know their roles. That's all they needed. He nodded again. Then he looked at the display for a long time without speaking. I understood what he was feeling. I had felt it myself. Many times. The specific weight of a plan that cannot be changed anymore, that is in motion now whether you are ready or not, carried forward by its own momentum. A plan that has become something you can only watch unfold, hoping the pieces you put in place months ago fit the reality you're now standing inside. The Vorkai fleet was 29 hours from the corridor entrance. The drones were in place. The cruisers were dark and silent behind the moon. And Oryx Thal, 1,000,000 ships at his back, was looking at a single human frigate and thinking he had already won. There is something almost painful about understanding exactly why your opponent is wrong and not being able to tell them. Not yet. I had read about Oryx Thal's campaigns for months. I knew how he thought. He saw the universe as a series of resource equations. More always beat less. Bigger always consumed smaller. He had conquered 41 species using this logic, and it had never once failed him. Because 41 species had looked at his fleet and done the same arithmetic he was doing and reached the same answer he was expecting. None of them had asked the next question. The question was not how many do you have. The question was what do you do with them once you have them. 1,000,000 soldiers are powerful on a plane, in a corridor, in a debris field, in a confined approach vector they cannot deviate from without violating their own doctrine. 1,000,000 soldiers are 1,000,000 objects that all need somewhere to be, and somewhere to go, and a structure that keeps them coordinated, and that structure has requirements, and those requirements have vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities are just targets that have not been found yet. I had found them 6 months ago. At the 31-hour mark, Kale came to me with one final piece of data. He had run the approach models continuously through the previous 12 hours, and had produced a refined estimate. The Vorkai fleet would begin corridor transit in 18 hours and 40 minutes. The first wave would be through in 2 hours. The last wave would still be in the corridor 6 hours after that. Maximum vulnerability window, he said, is at the 4-hour mark, when the lead elements are through, and the majority of the fleet is still in transit. That is when we detonate the cascade. That is when the corridor shifts. The lead elements cannot turn back. They will be past the point of return. The rear elements will still be entering. The middle will be stopped. Divided, I said. Into 3 sections, he said. Lead, core, and rear. None of them able to support the others for at least 90 minutes while they reorganize. And that's when Ruth brings the cruisers around. That is when the cruisers engage, he said. Yes, I looked at the model for a long time. It was clean, it was precise. It was also completely reliant on the Vorkai doing exactly what their doctrine required and not once, in the next 18 hours, deciding to be unpredictable. What's the probability they deviate from standard approach doctrine? I asked. Kale considered it. Low, he said. The Vorkai have never encountered a species that prepared a dedicated anti-doctrine response. Every species they have faced has either surrendered or attempted direct resistance. Direct resistance is what their doctrine is designed to defeat. There is no historical precedent in their records for what we are doing. That's because no one has done it to them before, I said. Correct, he said simply. I nodded. Get some rest, Leon. Bunk, not chair. He looked like he might argue. Then he looked at the map one more time. Then he nodded and walked off the bridge. I stayed. The hours between a plan being finished and a plan being tested are the strangest hours in any operation. The work is done. The decisions are made. All the variables you can control have been controlled, and the ones you cannot control are simply out there in the dark, waiting. Some captains in those hours pace the bridge. Some run simulations endlessly, looking for the flaw they missed, going over each step until the steps blur together. I have learned, over the years, that this kind of searching is mostly anxiety pretending to be diligence. The plan was either good or it was not. Looking at it again would not make it better. What I could do, what was actually useful, was rest and eat, and make sure that the person who needed to be sharp in 18 hours would be sharp. I went to the mess hall and ate an actual meal for the first time in 20 hours. Specialist Helen Burke was there, off shift, sitting alone with a cup of tea and a datapad. She looked up when I sat down across from her. For a moment she seemed uncertain whether to say anything. "Captain," she said. "Helen," I said. She looked down at her tea. "Are we going to be all right?" I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was that I did not know. The complete honest answer was that I had given us the best possible chance, and that the rest was beyond my control. The human answer, the answer that was neither false comfort nor unnecessary cruelty, was something slightly different. "I think we're going to be all right," I said. "I think we've done everything right. The rest depends on other people doing their jobs. And from what I've seen of this crew and the people behind that moon, I have no reason to doubt them." She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded, just once, and looked back down at her tea. I finished my meal in silence and went back to the bridge. 17 hours and 22 minutes remaining. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, 94,000 drones waited in the dark, each one holding perfectly still, tucked against a rock, drifting at the speed of nothing, carrying inside its small metal body a calculation that would, if everything went as planned, change the course of this war in a single morning. Somewhere behind the moon, 3 crews sat in silence, in dark ships with cold engines, waiting for a signal that would not come until it was time. Somewhere ahead of us, 1,000,000 ships came forward, slow and certain, without doubt, without imagination, without the faintest idea that the empty space between them and the colony below was not empty at all. I sat in my chair. I watched the display. I waited. There is a particular kind of silence that only exists on a warship the night before an engagement. It is not the silence of a quiet room or a sleeping city. It is the silence of people who are awake, fully awake, aware of everything around them, choosing not to speak because there is nothing left to say that the next few hours will not say louder. I walked the ship that night. All 3 hours of it, I did not sleep, and I did not pretend to. I moved through the corridors of the unrelenting deck by deck, not inspecting, not supervising, just present. The engineering section, where Dara Finch and her team were running final checks on drone relay networks they had already checked 4 times. The medical bebe, where Dr. Piers Aldos had laid out his supplies with the careful precision of a man who hopes very much not to need them. The crew quarters, where some people slept, and some people stared at the ceiling the same way I had stared at mine. Nobody asked me why I was there. They knew why I was there. A captain who walks the ship before a fight is not inspecting it. She is telling it, and everyone inside it, that she is still here, still present, still the person carrying the weight. It costs nothing. It means everything. At 0300 hours, I passed the communications room. Helen Burke was there, technically off duty, running a systems diagnostic that did not need to be run. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway. "I was just checking the relay alignments," she said. "I know," I said. "They're fine," she said. "They were fine the last 3 times I checked them too." "Good," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then, "Captain, when this is over one way or the other, will they know? The people on the ridge. Will they know what almost happened?" I thought about that honestly. "Some of them will," I said. "Eventually, not all of it, not all at once. Does that bother you?" she asked. I considered the question. A fair one. A lot of people in uniform spend time thinking about recognition, about the gap between what they do and what the world sees. It is a real feeling and an honest one. But I had been doing this long enough to have made peace with the arithmetic of it. "No," I said. "My job is not to be known. My job is to make sure they have ordinary mornings. Whether they know who kept those mornings ordinary doesn't change the morning." Helen Burke looked at me for a long time. Then she turned back to her console and ran the diagnostic a 4th time. There is a particular kind of patience that military planning demands, and it is not the patience of waiting. It is the patience of holding multiple truths in your mind at once, without letting any of them collapse the others. The truth that I might be wrong about the corridor. The truth that the Vorkai might deviate from doctrine for the first time in 400 years. The truth that 94,000 drones were an extraordinary number of moving parts, and moving parts could fail. All of those truths sat in me during those hours, quiet and heavy, and I held them the way you hold something fragile, not gripping. Because gripping breaks things, but present, aware, careful. What I did not allow was the fourth truth, that there was nothing more to do. That truth was the dangerous one. The one that invites a mind to spiral, to circle back over every decision looking for the mistake, to reopen what has been closed and recheck what has been checked. I had seen captains go down that road before an engagement. I had seen what it did to their decisions when the engagement finally came. Certainty is not the goal before a fight. Clarity is. Certainty is a form of blindness. Clarity keeps your eyes open. I had clarity. The plan was good. The people were ready. The drones were in place, and the cruisers were waiting, and Oryxthal, somewhere in his hive ship with 1,000,000 soldiers behind him, was looking at a single frigate and seeing the wrong thing. That was enough. Specialist Dara Finch knocked on my door at 0230 with a technical query about drone relay alignment that she had already solved but wanted to walk through with me anyway. I recognized what she was doing. She was a 26-year-old engineer who needed a few minutes of something normal before the morning came, and I sat with her for 20 minutes and let her explain her own solution back to herself until she felt settled. When she left, she looked less like someone trying not to think about tomorrow. That was worth 20 minutes. I went back to the bridge with 4 hours left on the clock and sat down in my chair and did not move until the display changed. The corridor lit up at 0412 hours. Not our drones, not the cascade. The Vorkai lead elements had entered the asteroid transit corridor earlier than projected, by 11 minutes, which in the context of a 6-hour transit window was not significant, but which meant that every timing calculation Kale had built over the last 30 hours needed to be shifted forward by 11 minutes. Kale was already at his station when it happened. He had the updated model on screen before I even sat down. They're moving faster than the last projection, he said. Current transit speed is 12% above their standard doctrine speed. Why? Owen asked. Unknown, Kale said. Possibly Oryxthal is impatient. Possibly he has received new intelligence. Possibly this is an anomaly in the dataset. The model still holds. The vulnerability window shifts forward by approximately 40 minutes, which means we need to signal the cruisers earlier than planned. I looked at the display. The lead elements of the Vorkai fleet were entering the corridor like the point of a spear. Hundreds of ships compressing into the narrower channel, guided by their doctrine. Their formation discipline still perfect even at elevated speed. How far is the lead element from the point of no return? I asked. At current speed 94 minutes, Kale said. Then we have 94 minutes before we commit, I said. Once the lead element passes that mark, we activate the cascade, and there is no going back. Owen was looking at me. And if something is wrong? If the cruisers aren't in position? Owen, I said. If we wait past the point of no return to decide, the point of no return will have passed. He held my gaze. Then he nodded. I opened a coded channel on the tightest possible beam. A signal directed precisely at the shadow side of the colony moon, too narrow to be detected, unless you were standing exactly where the cruisers were standing. Directed anvil, I said. Timing shift plus 40, confirm readiness, a slevicance of silence, then back through the same narrow beam, 3 short pulses. Ruth Darby's code for the Resolute, 2 long, 1 short. Ed Fenn on the Galloway, 3 short, 1 long. Nina Osi on the Ardent, all 3 ready. Something in my chest released. They're in position, I told Owen. They've been in position for 4 days, he said quietly. And there was something in his voice that I recognized. The specific kind of relief that comes not from knowing you are safe, but from knowing you are not alone. The next 94 minutes were the longest of my life, not because of the waiting. I had made peace with waiting years ago. They were long because of the counting. Every minute, Kale updated the position of the lead Vorkai elements in the corridor. Every minute, the window narrowed. At the 60-minute mark, the corridor was a river of ships stretching from the corridor entrance deep into the belt. The lead element committed and pushing forward, the body of the fleet still pouring in behind them. At 72 minutes, something changed on the display. I noticed it before Kale called it out. Anomaly in the core formation, Kale said. Several hundred units in the center of the main fleet body are slowing. Why? Owen asked. Unclear, Kale said. Possible sensor contact. Possible navigation adjustment. I'm not detecting any active targeting from their side. Are the drones showing? No, passive only, they're cold. I watched the display. The slowing was not stopping. The core units had reduced speed slightly. creating a subtle compression at the back of the lead element and a slight gap between core and rear. In Vorkai doctrine, this was an automatic correction behavior. The formation was maintaining its minimum separation distances. It actually helps us, Kale said. After a moment, the gap between core and rear is wider. When the corridor shifts, the rear elements will have more space to react, which means the split between sections will be cleaner. And the core is the largest section, I said. Correct. Roughly 400,000 units in the core group. I looked at the countdown in the corner of the display. 22 minutes. At minute 19, Oryxthal answered. His face on the screen was different this time. The copper eyes were sharp. Something in his posture had shifted. He was not gloating now. Captain Voss, he said. You have not moved? No, I said. You have one ship, he said. You have made no attempt to engage, no attempt to retreat, no attempt to make contact with any reinforcement. My scouts confirm you are alone. You have been alone for 2 days and you are still here. Yes, I said. He paused. This troubles me, he said. I felt something move in my chest. Satisfaction exactly, but a close relative of it. A general with 1,000,000 ships. And the thing that troubled him was one captain who had not moved. I understand that, I said. What are you waiting for, he asked. I looked at the countdown in the corner of my display. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Nothing now, I said. We were just finishing. I closed the channel and turned to Kale. 20 seconds, he said, not looking up. The bridge went very quiet. Not the silence of fear. I had felt that silence earlier, and it had a texture to it, a thickness. This was a different silence. The silence of people who had done everything they could and were now watching the work speak for itself. 10 seconds, Kale said. I looked at the display. The Vorkai lead element was past the point of no return. The core was deep in the corridor. The rear was still entering from behind. 5, Kale said. Now, Kale said. 94,000 drones woke up at once. The cascade began with 9 detonations, the anchor asteroids at the corridor's structural keypoints, each one struck with precise kinetic impact, not to destroy them but to move them. Just slightly. Just enough. Each anchor rock was the first domino in a chain of gravitational influence that rippled outward through the belt at exactly the speed that Kale's models had calculated. On the tactical display, it looked like the asteroid belt was breathing. Rocks that had been still for 1,000,000 years began very slowly to move. Not explosively. Not dramatically. The corridor did not collapse. It bent, twisted. The channel that the Vorkai had been navigating with such precision was no longer where it had been. The gravitational geometry of the transit passage shifted by 32 degrees over the course of 4 minutes, and 1,000,000 ships in formation cannot execute a 32-degree course correction in 4 minutes. Not while maintaining formation. Not without stopping. Lead element is through the far end of the belt, Kale said. Core is halting. Formation break. They're trying to reverse thrust and hold position. Rear elements are compressing against the core. The back of the column is bunching. The cruisers, I said. Owen sent the signal. Around the shadow side of Harkin's Ridge's moon, 3 cruisers lit up their engines for the first time in 4 days. When Ruth Darby brought the Resolute around the moon's edge at full power, I felt it on my display as a warm pulse of light, our own ships, finally visible, finally present, finally allowed to exist after 4 days of careful invisibility. Ed Fenn's Galloway came 15 seconds later. Nina Osei's Ardent followed immediately after that. 3 ships emerging from darkness into the middle of an engagement that was already, in the first 60 seconds, nothing like what Oryxthal had planned for. I will not pretend the engagement was simple or clean. It was not. The Vorkai core section, 400,000 ships, stopped and disorganized in a shifting debris field, was not helpless. It was confused, which is a different thing, and confusion in a force that size still produces enormous firepower directed in multiple directions at once. The lead element, past the point of no return in the far corridor, turned back and tried to re-enter the belt from the other side. They found the cascade had shifted that end as well. They were contained. At the 17-minute mark, Ed Fenn's Galloway took a direct hit from a weapons platform in the lead element that had made it to the outer belt's edge. The Galloway's forward section took severe damage. Fenn managed it. He pulled back his weapons range, continued covering the south approach, and kept his ship in the fight through what his after-action report would later describe with typical understatement as a challenging 17 minutes. At the 31-minute mark, 312 crew members on a frigate that had no business being in this fight were doing the job anyway. Helen Burke on communications was routing targeting data to all 3 cruisers simultaneously while monitoring the drone relay network. Kale was running live corrections to the cascade timing to compensate for unexpected asteroid movements. Owen was coordinating the 3 cruiser captains with a precision and speed that I will remember for the rest of my life. Quiet, exact, never raising his voice. Always knowing which captain needed which piece of information, and getting it there before they had to ask. A Vorkai swarm in broken formation is still a force of enormous size. What it is not is coordinated. Their doctrine was built on the assumption of continuous communication between all fleet elements, real-time hive coordination across the entire force. The cascade had split the fleet into 3 isolated sections. The lead could not talk to the core could not support the rear, and in that isolation, 400 years of successful swarm doctrine became 400,000 ships asking the same unanswered question at once. Where do I go? The answer our 4 ships provided was, nowhere useful. At the 2-hour and 40-minute mark, Oryxthal's flagship took a strike from the Resolute that took out his forward weapons array and 2 of his 3 engine systems. He hailed me 6 minutes later. He did not look the way I had expected a defeated general to look. He was not broken. He was not desperate. He was, if anything, more focused than before. The copper eyes sharp and steady, his enormous frame still and controlled. You had 4 ships, he said. I did, I said. 4 ships against 1,000,000. Numbers are only power, I said, when they can reach you. He was silent for a very long moment. You knew where we would come, he said. I knew where you had to come, I said. Your doctrine required it. I read your doctrine. Something happened in his expression that the translator could not quite capture. A shift in the compound eyes, a stillness in the mandibles. In my study of Vorkai body language, the closest equivalent I had ever found for that expression was the human expression for a thought that changes. Something fundamental. The rear sections are withdrawing, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. The lead element is attempting to regroup. They will take time. Yes. And you intend to prevent them. I intend to give them the opportunity to withdraw, I said. Their choice. He was quiet again. Then you are a very strange species, Captain Voss. We've been told, I said. You fought to protect 70,000 colonists you will never meet. That's what the job is. The job, he repeated, as if the word was unfamiliar. In the Dominion, a soldier fights to expand the swarm, to add numbers, to grow. There is no other purpose. Our purpose is different, I said. And what is your purpose? I thought about Harkin's Ridge, about the farmers and the children, and the people complaining about the cold on an ordinary morning, that had stayed ordinary because of the work done in the dark above them. To make sure there is a tomorrow, I said, for everyone who deserves one. Oryxthal held my gaze through the screen for a long time. Then, without ceremony, the signal cut. The Vorkai fleet withdrew, not in panic, not in chaos. The lead element pulled back with discipline. The rear withdrew first, the core last. It took 4 hours for the last of them to clear the system, and during those 4 hours, not a single shot was fired by either side. I watched them go. When the last contact disappeared from the tactical display, the bridge did not erupt immediately. There was a moment, just a moment, of complete silence, in which 312 human beings simply existed in the same universe as the thing they had just done, and felt the full weight of it. The engagement lasted 3 hours and 47 minutes in total, though it existed in my memory not as a single continuous thing but as a series of sharp, separate moments that the adrenaline of the situation cut into individual images, each one precise, each one permanent. Moment 1. The sound Leon Kale made when the cascade activated correctly. Not an exclamation, not a celebration, simply a very quiet exhale through his nose, as if a calculation he had been holding in his body for 30 hours had finally been released. Moment 2. The first confirmation from Ruth Darby on the Resolute, her voice coming through the communications relay, 3 seconds after her ship rounded the moon, flat, professional, and carrying underneath its calm the specific tone of a person who has been sitting in the dark for 4 days and is very glad to finally be doing something. Moment 3. The tactical display at the 20-minute mark, when the Vorkai core formation, 400,000 ships, attempted simultaneously to reverse course, to hold position, and to maintain formation integrity, and accomplished none of those 3 things with any precision, because those 3 things are contradictory objectives, and a 1,000,000-ship swarm that has never been disrupted mid-transit does not have a trained response for contradictory objectives. What it has is volume. Volume without direction is not a force. It is a situation. Moment 4. Owen's voice, very steady, calling trajectory updates to Nina Ossi's Ardent, while simultaneously relaying targeting data from Kale's station to Ed Fenn's Galloway, without once losing track of which communication was going where. I had known for years that Owen Carver was exceptional. I had known it the way you know the temperature of a room. Present, unremarkable, taken for granted. Watching him work that morning, I knew it differently. Moment 5, Helen Burke, at the 48-minute mark, rerouting the entire drone relay network through a backup frequency after the primary band developed interference from the debris field, completing the reroute in under 4 minutes, maintaining targeting continuity for all 3 cruisers throughout the process. She did not announce it. She simply fixed it and kept working. When I caught her eye across the bridge afterward, she gave me a very small nod, the nod of someone who has just done something difficult in a situation that did not allow for difficulty, and wanted no particular acknowledgement beyond the knowledge that it had been done. Those were not the only moments. There were others. A hull breach in Section 4 of the Unrelenting, sealed by damage control teams in 7 minutes. A targeting system glitch on the Galloway that Ed Fenn compensated for manually for 22 minutes before his crew got it back online. A brief, dangerous exchange between 2 lead element Vorkai ships that had made it back through the debris field and attempted to flank the Ardent from the south. Nina Ose handled it with a precision that later, reading her after-action report, I found myself rereading 3 times just to understand the geometry of what she had done. The battle was not clean. It was not a perfect execution of the plan. The plan was a frame, and like any frame, it shaped what was possible, without controlling every detail of what happened inside it. What happened inside it was 312 crew members on the Unrelenting and 1,400 more across 3 cruisers doing their jobs, in conditions that were loud, fast, demanding, and occasionally frightening, and doing those jobs well enough that when the Vorkai rear section finally turned and withdrew, the outcome was the one the plan had been designed to produce. At the 2-hour and 20-minute mark, before Oryxthal hailed me, I had a single minute in which nothing urgent was happening. The core section had been contained. The rear was withdrawing. The lead was attempting to regroup in the far belt, and finding the cascade had made that difficult. 1 minute, I used it to stand up from my chair, walk to the observation window, and look at Harkin's Ridge below. From here it was still a gray-white crescent, still half in shadow, still completely ordinary looking. The kind of planet that does not invite drama. Cold soil, modest settlements, farmers who came here for the quiet. They were still there. All 70,000 of them. I went back to my chair. Then Helen Burke, 24 years old and never in a combat engagement before this morning, said very quietly, "We actually did it." And then everyone on the bridge talked at once, and someone laughed. And Owen put his head in his hands for exactly 3 seconds before lifting it again and looking at me with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "They're gone," he said. "They're gone," I agreed. "The dead do not wait for you to finish celebrating. They are simply there when the celebrating is done, and they were there when I finally sat alone in my quarters, 6 hours after the last Vorkai ship cleared the system. 41 names on the Unrelenting. I read everyone, not quickly, not as an administrative task, slowly, the way you read the name of someone you knew. Even the ones I had not known well, because a name is the last record a person leaves, and reading it is the least you can do. I knew some of them by their stations, a few by the conversations we had shared in the mess hall or during drills, some only by the entries in their personnel files that I had read during the night walks of the past 4 days. The details that tell you who a person is when the uniform is off, where they were from, what they had been before they joined the fleet, what they were hoping to go back to. Ed Fenn's crew on the Galloway had lost 37, Ruth Darby on the Resolute 18, Nina Ose on the Ardent 22. The Galloway itself was damaged badly enough that it would need to limp to the nearest repair station under half power, traveling at a fraction of its normal speed, for a journey that would take 3 weeks. 618 people. I sat with that number for a long time. It is a number that fills a room even when you are alone in the room. Owen knocked on my door at the 2-hour mark and came in with 2 mugs of coffee. He sat across from me and set one in front of me without asking whether I wanted it, which I appreciated. "Command is sending a commendation," he said. "Promotion offer as well. They want you in front of an inquiry board within 2 weeks, not a disciplinary one. They want to understand what happened here." "Good," I said. "They should understand it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, 618. "Yes, you couldn't have known the Galloway would take that hit." "No," I said. "The plan was as good as it could be." "Yes," I said. "Plans always are." I paused. "That doesn't change the number." Owen held his mug in both hands and looked at the wall. "Do you regret it?" I thought about that honestly, the way the question deserved. The answer was complicated. I regretted the losses the way a person regrets any irreversible thing, fully, and without the ability to undo it. What I did not regret was the decision. The decision had been correct. The 70,000 people on Harkenridge were alive because the decision had been correct. 618 people had known the risk and taken it voluntarily. That does not make the loss less real. It makes it less avoidable. I regret every one of them, I said. I don't regret the order. Owen nodded slowly. There's something else, he said. He pulled out a small datapad and set it on the table between us. Oryxthal is alive. The Galloway damaged his flagship but did not destroy it. He made it back to Vorkai space. I know, I said. And he's requesting a parley. I looked at the datapad. The message was short. It had been translated by the military linguistics team at Fleet Command, and a note at the top indicated they had cross-checked it 3 times because the content was unusual for a Vorkai communication. The Vorkai had conquered 41 species. In their history, no conquered species had ever successfully resisted a swarm fleet. The message read, "You are the first species in Dominion history to defeat a first swarm fleet. We do not understand you. We wish to." I read it twice. Owen's instincts were already speaking before I put the datapad down. They'll use it to study our tactics. Whatever engagement data they gathered, a parley gives them access to our strategic thinking directly. We would be handing them a window into. Owen, I said. He stopped. I know what a parley gives them, I said. I also know what refusing it gives them. What does it give them? Time, I said. Time to rebuild. Time to adapt. Time to come back with a fleet that has already accounted for asteroid belts and corridors, and dark-running cruisers. Every year of silence between us is a year they spend designing around what we did here. I looked at the datapad. We won a battle. A battle is a moment. What comes after the moment is a decision. He was very quiet. The Vorkai are not going away, I said. They have 1 million soldiers. They have the next 1,000,000 after that. Every species they have ever conquered, they conquered because the species saw no alternative to surrender. We showed them there is an alternative, but alternatives only change things if the conversation continues. You want to talk to Oryxthal, Owen said. I want to find out what kind of species decides, after the first defeat in their history, that their response is to ask a question instead of build a bigger fleet. Owen picked up his mug and looked at it for a moment. And if it is a trap, then we are very careful, I said. I picked up the datapad, opened the reply function, and wrote 1 line, bring no soldiers. I will bring no targets. I sent it before Owen could object. He stared at me. Then slowly he let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means someone is deciding whether to argue or accept. I had worked with Owen Carver for 11 years. I knew the difference. He accepted. When? He asked. 3 weeks, I said. Enough time for the Galloway to reach the repair station. Enough time for command to be informed. Enough time for Oryxthal to get back to Vorkai space and make the proposal to his council. And if his council says no, then we find out whether he came to us as a representative of the Dominion or as something more complicated, I said. Owen turned that over. Then, you think he came on his own initiative, don't you? The parley request. You think it was his idea, not his council's. I thought about the message. The phrasing, the way it had said, we do not understand you. Not they, not the Dominion does not understand you, we. Yes, I said, I think so. Outside, beyond the hull, Harkin's Ridge turned in its slow orbit. 70,000 people going about their ordinary day, unaware of everything that had happened in the dark above them, unaware of the 618 who would not be going home. That is the weight that captains carry, not the battle, the after, the knowing, the list of names that you read slowly, alone, in a room that does not know it is carrying something enormous. I finished my coffee and went back to work. The Unrelenting had a moon to orbit and a crew to look after and a parley to prepare for. The morning after the battle was still a morning. People still needed to eat and sleep and know that the person in the captain's chair had not been broken by what had been asked of her. I had not been broken. That was not the same as being unchanged. I was different after that night, not in the ways that are easy to explain. I was still Mara Voss. I still ran the ship the same way, made decisions the same way, trusted Owen the same way, valued Leon Kale's mathematics the same way I always had. But somewhere in the silence of reading 618 names one by one, something had been added to me that I did not have before. Not grief, I had known grief before, something more specific. A weight that was also, somehow, a kind of clarity. The knowledge of exactly what things cost. The knowledge that the cost does not diminish the necessity. The knowledge that both of those things can be true at once. And that living with both of them is simply what the job requires. I spent the first day after the engagement dealing with the logistics that follow any military action. Reports, medical assessments, structural surveys of the ship, communications with Fleet Command, status updates from Ruth Darby and Nina Osi, and the detailed, Careful messages from Ed Fenn about the condition of the Galloway. The damage to the Galloway was worse than the initial assessment had suggested. A secondary power coupling had failed 6 hours after the main hit, taking out the ship's secondary drive systems. Fenn would need to travel at reduced capacity for longer than initially projected. I arranged for a supply drone to meet him at the halfway point, with replacement components his engineers could install en route. The logistics of the aftermath are the part that does not appear in the histories. The histories record the engagement, the outcome, the names of commanding officers. They do not record the 17 separate administrative communications that a frigate captain sends in the 36 hours after a battle, or the 3-page damage assessment that Owen drafted at 0400 on the morning after, or the medical triage reports from Dr. Piers Aldous, who had not slept in 40 hours and who submitted his report with characteristic precision despite that fact. They do not record the crew meetings I held on the afternoon of the first day, small groups, not the whole ship at once, because some conversations need a smaller room. I sat with the engineering team for 40 minutes, with the weapons section for 30, with the communications crew, which was 3 people including Helen Burke, for an hour. I did not have speeches prepared. I did not have the kind of words that make people feel their grief was worth something. I had the only thing I actually had, which was the truth. What they had done had mattered. The people who were gone had done their jobs, and the unrelenting would carry their names. It was not enough. It is never enough. But it was what there was. On the second day, a message came from the Colonial Administrator of Harkins Ridge. A formal communication, addressed to Fleet Command and copied to the Unrelenting. It acknowledged that the colony had been made aware of the events of the previous 48 hours. It thanked the fleet for its service. It noted that a memorial was being planned and asked for the names of the fallen. Owen brought it to me on the bridge. I read it twice. Then I printed the list of 618 names from my folder and sent it back. At the bottom of the list I added one line. They knew what they were doing, and they did it anyway. Fleet Command's formal commendation arrived on the 3rd day. It used the word extraordinary 11 times. I read it once and put it in the administrative folder without annotation. Commendations are documents for files and ceremonies. They are not the thing itself. The promotion offer was more complicated. Fleet Command wanted me in a strategic advisory role at the headquarters level, a position with more reach, more resources, more ability to shape the broader response to the Vorkai situation. It was a reasonable offer. It was also a position far from a ship. I requested a 2-week deferral of the decision, citing ongoing operational needs. Fleet Command granted it. I suspected they knew the answer already. On the 4th day, I found Leon Kale in the drone bay, running a complete post-operation diagnostic on every drone relay unit that had survived the cascade. Most had not. The cascade had consumed them by design, kinetic delivery systems that activated once and were not intended to be recovered. But 4,300 units had survived. Those deployed in the belt's outer ring that had served primarily as relay nodes rather than direct, kinetic actors. Kale was checking each one individually. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know," he said. "I want to know which ones worked and which didn't, and why and where the variance was." "For the next time," I said. He looked up from the unit in his hands. "For the next time," he agreed, not grimly, not reluctantly, simply as a statement of professional interest. Leon Kale did not romanticize war. He was interested in how things worked, how they could be made to work better. "The cascade worked," I said. "The cascade worked with an 11-minute variance that I didn't predict," he said. "I want to know why. If the variance had been in the other direction, if the Vorkai had been 11 minutes slower, the vulnerability window would have been narrower. At 15 minutes slower, it might have closed entirely. But it didn't." "No," he said, "but the reason it didn't wasn't the plan. It was the Vorkai moving faster than doctrine suggested. I built the model on their historical transit speeds. Those speeds appear to have a wider variance than the dataset suggested." He set the drone unit down carefully. "The next model will account for that." I looked at him for a moment. "Leon, you saved this colony." He looked at me with the expression of a man who finds that kind of statement slightly uncomfortable, not because he was modest but because he found it imprecise. "The plan saved the colony," he said. "I did the mathematics the plan required." "That is the same thing," I said. He considered it. "Perhaps," he said, and went back to his diagnostic. I left him to it and went back to the bridge. On the 5th day, I had a private communication with each of the 3 cruiser captains. Ruth Darby was characteristically direct. She had already submitted her after-action report, already begun the process of identifying the command decisions that had worked and the ones she would make differently. already thinking about the strategic implications of what the engagement had revealed about Vorkai formation behavior. She was 3 years younger than me and had been doing the job for 15 years with a consistency and precision that I found, each time I worked with her, deeply reassuring. Ed Fenn called from the Galloway, while his crew was midway through installing the replacement drive components. He sounded tired in a way that was specific and honest, the tiredness of someone who had pushed his ship and his people past what was comfortable and knew the price of it. He asked about the casualty numbers from the other ships. I gave them to him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would be sending personal letters to the families of his 37, and asked if I had done the same for mine. I'm writing them now, I said, one at a time. Good, he said. Not performatively. Just that is the right thing, and good that you are doing it. Nina Osi called last. She was the youngest of the 3 captains and the one I knew least well by direct experience, and the call told me things her personnel file had not. She was precise in her analysis, the way Kale was precise, not coldly, but with the particular intelligence of someone who processes experience by understanding it fully before feeling it. She had questions about the cascade mechanics, about the drone deployment sequence, about the corridor mapping. She was building a model in her mind, the same way Kale was building a better variance model in the drone bay. Would you do it again? I asked her at the end. She considered it honestly. I'd want more preparation time, she said. 4 days in the dark was tight. 6 would have been better. Noted, I said. But yes, she said. I'd do it again. I believed her. The letters to the families of the 41 took 2 full days. I wrote each one by hand, not literally, but without templates, without formulas, finding for each person something specific that was true. That was the standard I held myself to. Not comforting language, true language. If I had spoken to someone, I wrote about what we had spoken about. If I had only known them by their station, I wrote about what their station had meant to the ship. If I had known them only by a personnel file entry, I wrote about what that entry had contained, where they were from, what they had been hoping to return to, and I made sure the words I used were their words, not mine. It was slow work, necessary work, the kind of work that does not get easier with practice. On the evening of the 7th day, with 9 days remaining, until the parley, I sat on the bridge alone after the night watch had settled into its quiet rhythm, and I read the parley. Request again. We do not understand you. We wished to. I had been thinking about those words since the first time I read them, not the diplomatic implications, though those were significant, not the strategic question, though that was real. Something more basic, a species that has conquered 41 worlds, and never once asked that question about any of them. A species whose doctrine contained no framework for understanding an enemy, only for defeating one. A species that had, for 412 years, operated on the assumption that understanding was unnecessary because overwhelming force was sufficient. And then one morning in an asteroid belt above a colony world, something had changed. Not everything, not the Dominion, not Oryx Thal himself, not entirely and not yet. But something had shifted. Something had been introduced into a system that had run the same way for 4 centuries. A variable the system did not know how to process. We do not understand you. That was the most significant military development of the engagement. Not the cascade, not the 4 ships against 1,000,000. Those were tactics. This was something else. I did not know what would come of the parley. I did not know whether the Swarm Council would sanction whatever Oryx Thal was moving toward, or whether his own council would regard the parley as a deviation to be corrected. I did not know whether understanding, even if it developed, would be enough to hold against 4 centuries of expansion doctrine. I did not know any of those things. What I knew was that the only way to find out was to go. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to the parley at Anchor Point 7. I had a lot of work to do. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to the parley at Anchor Point 7. I had a lot of work to do. The neutral station on the edge of Vorkai space was called Anchor Point 7. It had been built by a species called the Hevasi 20 years before the Dominion had absorbed them, and it had since served as a transit hub, a refueling station, and on one recorded occasion a refugee processing center during a border crisis. It was gray and functional and utterly unremarkable, which was exactly why I had chosen it. I arrived on a shuttle with Owen Carver and 2 fleet interpreters, a man named Colin Webb and a woman named Iris Tanner, who had spent 7 years studying Vorkai communication patterns and were, between them, the 2 people on Earth most qualified to make sure nothing important got lost in translation. They were both calm, professional, and visibly aware of the fact that no human being had ever attended a Vorkai parley before. That awareness showed in small ways, the way Iris kept her datapad very close, The way Colin adjusted his equipment twice before we docked. Good people, prepared people, no weapons, no escort vessel. The Unrelenting was holding position 40,000 kilometers away with instructions not to move unless I did not check in every 6 hours. Ruth Darby had the Resolute nearby dark just in case I had not told Owen about Ruth. Some insurance is better kept quiet. Arixthal was already there when I arrived. He filled the meeting room the way only something that size can fill a room. Not aggressively, but completely. He was alone except for 2 Vorkai translators, which surprised me. I had expected guards, an escort, some demonstration of rank. Instead, there was just an enormous insectoid general sitting at a plain table in a gray station room, his compound eyes moving slowly across my face as I walked in. "Captain Voss," he said, as General said. I sat down across from him. The table between us was barely wide enough to make the distance feel real. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not from awkwardness, from something more deliberate. We were both, I think, measuring the room, the distance, the fact that we were here at all. Then Orixthal said, "How did you know we would come through the central corridor?" I had expected this question. I had thought about how to answer it for 3 weeks. "I didn't know," I said. "I prepared for every corridor you might use." He was still. "You prepared for multiple outcomes." 11 of them, I said. The corridor option was 1. I had plans for 7 other approach vectors. 2 decoy scenarios and 1 contingency for a direct orbital assault bypassing the belt entirely. 11 plans, he said slowly. You used resources on 10 plans that were never needed. Yes. In the Dominion, he said, that would be considered an unacceptable waste. In humanity, I said, it's called being ready. He was quiet for a moment. The compound eyes shifted. We have never lost a swarm fleet engagement, he said. In 412 years, 41 species. Not one of them prepared for multiple outcomes. I know, I said. Why, he asked, a genuine question. Not rhetorical, not a challenge. He wanted to know. Most species see 1,000,000 ships and calculate whether they can match the number, I said. They cannot. So they stop calculating. They either surrender or they resist directly, and they lose. I leaned forward slightly. We do not think about the number. We think about what the number requires. 1,000,000 ships require a formation. A formation requires a corridor. A corridor has walls. Walls can be moved. Orixthal looked at me for a long time. You did not try to match our strength, he said. You changed the shape of the encounter. Yes, you studied our doctrine, he said, for 6 months, and used it against us. Your doctrine is excellent for the war you have always fought, I said. It was not designed for us. You have never encountered a species that read your doctrine before meeting your fleet. The silence that followed had a different quality from the others. Not the silence of assessment or calculation. Something else. Show me you're dead, he said. The words stopped me. I looked at him. The copper eyes were steady, and something in his posture had shifted. Not toward aggression or authority. Something closer to what I might describe in a human being as a willingness to receive something difficult. What? Owen said quietly beside me. You're dead, Orixthal said again. The ones lost in the engagement. Show me their names. I looked at Owen. He looked back at me. Then, slowly, he reached into the folder I had brought and pulled out a single printed page. 618 names. Fleet Command had given me an official list. I had printed it myself and brought it without knowing exactly why. Now I knew. I placed it on the table between us. Orixthal looked at it for a long time. He did not touch it. He simply looked, his enormous frame completely still, the copper eyes moving slowly across the page. We have conquered 41 species, he said finally. None of them showed us they're dead. We are not trying to impress you, I said. We are trying to make sure you understand what it would cost you to try again. He looked up from the page. These numbers mean nothing to you in terms of Dominion scale, he said. You lost 600. We lost over 40,000 in the corridor engagement. Every number on that page, I said, means something to someone, a family, a crew, a friend who will not sleep well for years. I paused. That is why we do not fight for territory. We fight for the people who would not sleep well. He was quiet. In the Dominion, he said, soldiers are resources. They are counted and deployed and replaced. The swarm does not grieve. The swarm continues. I know, I said. That is a very efficient system for expansion. It is not efficient for survival. He tilted his enormous head slightly. Explain. A species that does not grieve its dead does not calculate the true cost of war, I said. You expand because expansion has no emotional price. One day you will encounter something that costs more than you can replace, and you will have no framework for recognizing the warning signs. Because you have never been taught that losing something matters. I looked at the page between us. We have been taught we carry it with us. You are suggesting, Orixthal said slowly, that the way we experience loss is a tactical vulnerability. I am saying it is a strategic one, I said. You can rebuild a fleet. You cannot rebuild 400 years of a culture that has never learned what it costs to lose one. Owen was very still beside me. Oryx Thal looked at the page of names again. Then he looked at me with something I could not name and had not expected to find on the face of a book. Species that had conquered 41 worlds without pause. He looked uncertain, not afraid, not calculating, uncertain, as in, here is a fact I did not have, and I do not yet know where it goes. You accepted the parley, he said. Your officer argued against it. I saw his expression when you entered. He does not believe this conversation is safe. He doesn't, I said. He is being a good officer. But you came anyway. Winning a battle does not end a war, I said. Ending a war requires someone to have the conversation that comes after. He was quiet for a very long time. The Swarm Council will not welcome this, he said. What I am doing here, sitting at this table, asking these questions, it is not within doctrine. No, I said. But you asked to meet. That was not within doctrine either. No, he agreed. He looked at the page of names one final time. It was not. I reached across the table and picked up the page carefully. I folded it and put it back in my folder. I am not asking you to stop being the Dominion, I said. I am not asking you to change who you are. I am telling you that we will not surrender. Not today, not in the next campaign, not with a larger fleet. We will always find the corridor. We will always build 11 plans. And every time you come for our people, there will be more names on a list like that one, yours and ours both. Oryx Thal was very still. I am asking, I said, whether there is a version of this future where the list stops growing. The room was silent for a long time. Then Oryx Thal said, in your species, your leaders, your generals, your council, do they speak for all of you? No, I said, they make recommendations, the people vote. He processed this. The people who were farming on Harkon's Ridge, he said. They vote on matters of war and treaty. They do, I said. And if they voted against peace, then there would be no peace, I said. And I would argue with them loudly. And we would argue back and forth for a very long time and eventually something would be decided. It is inefficient. It is also why we are still here. Something happened in his expression. I had studied Vorkai body language for months, and there were still expressions that fell outside my reference data. This was one of them. An emotion, perhaps, that their species experienced but had no clean translation into anything human. What I can say is that when Oryx Thal stood from the table, he did not look like a general who had won. He did not look like a general who had lost. He looked like something in between. Something that had encountered a fact it had not previously possessed and was deciding, slowly, where to put it. The Swarm Council will be consulted, he said. The Unrelenting will be waiting, I said. He moved toward the door, then he stopped. Without turning, he said, those 11 plans, the 10 that were never needed. Yes, I said. You still have them? I looked at Owen. Owen looked back at me, and I saw it. The faintest edge of something in his expression that was very close to amusement. He had known me for 11 years. He knew what was coming. I have them, Oryx Thal was still for a moment. 1 second. 2. Then he walked out. I sat in the gray room after the door closed. Owen beside me, the 2 interpreters quiet in the corner. Iris Tanner was holding her datapad very tightly. Colin Webb was looking at the empty doorway with the expression of someone who has just witnessed something they will spend a long time describing to other people. Then Owen said very quietly, was that a threat or a reassurance? Both, I said. That's the only way it works. I stood and picked up my folder. 618 names. The weight of them was not the weight of paper. It was the weight of every morning that had happened on Harkon's Ridge, because they had done their jobs in the dark. The shuttle back to the Unrelenting took 40 minutes. I spent most of it looking out the window at the stars, which do not care about wars or treaties or the species that arrange themselves beneath them, but which are, at great distance, very beautiful. Owen sat beside me in silence for a long time. Then he said, do you think he'll come back with a peace offer or a bigger fleet? I thought about it, honestly. I think, I said, that he will spend a long time looking at a million ship formation and wondering which corridor I have already prepared for. And if the answer is all of them? I leaned my head back against the seat and looked at the stars. Then we find out if uncertainty is enough, I said. Sometimes, if the other side is not sure they can win, they choose to think instead of fight. And thinking, in my experience, is where wars actually end. Owen was quiet for the rest of the flight. When we docked with the Unrelenting, Helen Burke was waiting at the airlock with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Owen and one to me without a word. I took mine. I stood in the airlock of a damaged frigate at the edge of explored space and thought about a gray-white planet and 70,000 people who had woken up that morning to an ordinary day People who did not know how many had carried that ordinariness on their backs. People who did not know the names on the page in my folder. People who did not know about 11 plans and 94,000 drones and 3 cruisers running dark behind a moon and a general sitting in a gray room asking to understand what he could not yet name. They did not need to know. That was the point. That was the whole point. The 40-minute shuttle ride back to the Unrelenting was the quietest 40 minutes I can remember. Not the quiet of tension. The quiet of completion. The specific stillness that follows a thing that has been fully done and cannot be undone. The parley had happened. Those words had been spoken. Oryx Thal had walked out of a gray room carrying something he had not walked in with, and whatever happened next would happen in a world that contained that conversation. I do not know how to explain what that felt like. I have tried. Since then, when people have asked, I have used the word significant and the word uncertain and the word necessary, and none of those words are wrong, and none of them are sufficient. What it felt like was this, like standing at a door and not knowing what was on the other side and knowing that this was the only door and walking through it anyway, and then turning around and finding that the door was still there, still open, and you were still alive, and whatever was on the other side was at least partly yours to shape. That was the feeling. Colin Webb, one of the interpreters, said nothing for most of the flight. At the 30-minute mark he said, I have spent 7 years studying Vorkai communication patterns. He paused. I have never heard a Vorkai general ask a question the way he asked that last one. Which one? I asked. The 11 plans, he said. You still have them, the way he said it. He was quiet for a moment. In Vorkai linguistic structure, that construction, the simple present confirmation at the end of a departure, is reserved for facts the speaker intends to carry with them. It is not small talk. It is a way of marking a thing as retained. I looked at him. He was telling me he was going to remember it. He was telling you he was going to think about it, Colin said. In their language there is a distinction. Memory is passive. The construction he used implies active consideration. I thought about that for a long time. Iris Tanner, the second interpreter, had not said anything the entire shuttle ride. She was looking at her datapad, reading something. At the 35-minute mark, she said, without looking up, Captain, in the 7 years I have been studying Vorkai communication, I have access to records of 39 diplomatic engagements between the Dominion and other species. Surrender negotiations mostly, terms of absorption. In none of those 39 records did a Vorkai representative ask the other party to show them they're dead. The shuttle was quiet. He asked that before I offered it, I said. Yes, she said. She looked up from her datapad. I do not know what that means yet, but I intend to think about it for a very long time. Owen said nothing. He was looking out the window at the stars, but I could see in his profile that he was listening to every word. When we docked, and Helen Burke handed me the coffee, and I stood in the airlock thinking about 70,000 people on a gray-white planet having their ordinary morning. I thought also about Oryx Thal in his hive ship heading back to Vorkai space, with 11 plans in his mind that he had not arrived with. We gave him something to think about. That is all diplomacy ever is at the start. A thing to think about. A variable introduced into a system that has run the same way for a very long time. Whether the system changes depends on what it does with the variable. And that is not something you can force or predict. You can only make sure the variable is true and clear and worth thinking about. I believe it was. I believe that because of what it cost. Things that cost nothing are easy to discard. Things that cost something, things paid for in names on a page, in ships running dark for 4 days, in mathematics done in a chair through 2 sleepless nights, those things have a different weight. Oryx Thal held that page of names and did not look away from it. I do not know yet how much, but it matters. I am Mara Voss. I am the captain of the Unrelenting. I carry a list of 618 names in a folder in my quarters, and I read every one of them slowly on the nights when the arithmetic seems too simple. We are not the strongest species. We are not the fastest breeding. We are not the most armored or the most efficient or the most certain. We are the ones who learn to aim. And we are the ones who, when the aiming is done, sit down in a gray room and ask whether the next generation has to do it again. That is what it means to be human. I have not yet found a better definition. I drank my coffee. The stars continued their slow and ancient motion, indifferent to everything beneath them. That is fine. We have never needed the stars to notice us. We have always been very good at noticing ourselves.